Think about what the freak show actually was for a moment, not what it became in the cultural retelling, the gaudy tent, the carnival barker, the paid spectacle of human difference. Think about what it functionally was, a mechanism for displaying bodies that did not fit, to crowds who paid to confirm that those bodies were not like theirs. That's the official story, and I'm not here to dismiss it entirely. But here's what I keep returning to. The thing that won't leave me alone when I sit with the timeline closely enough. The industrial-scale exhibition of giant human beings, people measuring 7, 8, sometimes reportedly 9 feet tall, begins in earnest almost precisely after 1820. Not before, after, and I want to know why then. I want to know what changed. The mainstream explanation for the rise of the 19th century freak show is economic and cultural. The Industrial Revolution created mass urban populations with disposable leisure time. P.T. Barnum and his contemporaries were entrepreneurial geniuses who monetized novelty. Giants, dwarfs, and other individuals of unusual stature became commodities within an emerging entertainment economy. It's a clean, satisfying story. It fits the broader arc of capitalist modernity, and most of the time, that explanation is enough. I understand why historians accept it. It's not wrong, exactly. It accounts for the mechanics of the institution, it explains the money. What it does not explain, and here is where I slow down and stop, is the sheer, strange abundance of the giants themselves. Consider Anna Swan. She was born in 1846 in Millbrook, Nova Scotia, and by adulthood stood somewhere between 7 feet, 5 inches, and 7 feet, 11 inches depending on the source. She joined Barnum's American Museum in 1862. She was literate, articulate, and by most accounts fully aware of the contractual terms of her exhibition. She was not hidden, she was displayed, and yet when the American Museum burned in 1865, Barnum's published accounts of the rescue effort describe extraordinary logistical difficulty simply removing her from the building. They had to widen doorways. They used a derrick. The infrastructure of the ordinary world, the doors, the hallways, the rescue equipment, was not built for someone of her size. That detail I keep returning to, not because it's sinister in isolation, but because it tells you something about the practical reality of a body that large existing inside ordinary civilization. Now extend that thought. If one individual of that size creates that kind of infrastructural problem, what does a population of them look like? And what I mean by population is this. In the decades following 1820, the number of documented giant human beings appearing in public exhibition contexts across North America and Europe is not 1 or 2, it is dozens, possibly more. Martin Van Buren Bates, the so-called Kentucky Giant, stood 7 feet 9 inches. He served in the Confederate Army, was reportedly a captain, and later married Anna Swan in 1871. 2 giants, legally wed, publicly celebrated, exhibited jointly by Barnum after the war. Angus McCaskill of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, reached 7 feet 9 inches and was documented by physicians as possessing proportional gigantism, meaning his measurements were not distorted by bone disease, but simply enormous versions of normal human architecture. These are not isolated cases, they form a pattern, and patterns, when they concentrate in time and space, deserve a question. Here is the question I keep asking, and I want you to sit with it the way I have. Where did they come from? Not biologically, I understand the mechanisms of genetic variation, but socially, geographically. These individuals appear in the record already adult, already formed, often already bearing the marks of prior history, military service, prior employment, prior lives that are documented in fragments, and then go quiet. The official genealogies are thin, remarkably thin for people who were famous in their own time. Anna Swan's early life in Nova Scotia is sparsely recorded before Barnum's agents arrived. Bates's military records exist but are incomplete in ways that don't match the completeness of other officers of similar rank from the same period. McCaskill's origins in the Outer Hebrides are essentially undocumented before his appearance in Cape Breton. I want to be precise here. I am not saying the records were destroyed. I am saying the records were never dense to begin with, which is a different kind of absence, and one that is harder to explain. Let me steelman the counter-argument, because it deserves to be made carefully. Record-keeping in the early 19th century was inconsistent, especially in rural and immigrant communities. Nova Scotia in the 1840s was not a place where thorough parish records were the norm for every family. The Outer Hebrides were poorer still. McCaskill's thin biographical record before Cape Breton might simply reflect the documentary poverty of the place and time he came from. That is a fair point, and for any single case it would be fully satisfying. But it applies with remarkable uniformity to nearly every giant of the mid-19th century circuit. They emerge from thin documentary records, enter the exhibition economy fully formed, are displayed for years or decades, and then die, frequently young, frequently under circumstances that generate no prolonged legal or institutional inquiry. The pattern of sparse origin documentation is too consistent across too many individuals, too many countries, and too many decades to be explained purely by the general documentary poverty of the era, because other people from those same places and times do have records. Merchants, farmers, soldiers. The giants disproportionately do not. Now here is where the structure of the thing begins to feel strange to me. P.T. Barnum was not a lone actor. His American museum operated within a broader ecosystem of exhibition entrepreneurs, Barnum's European contemporaries, the travelling circus circuits in Britain and Germany, the variety halls of London, the Wunderkammer tradition that had been evolving since the 16th century. These were competing commercial entities. They did not coordinate strategy. They stole talent from one another, underbid each other, occasionally engaged in outright fraud against each other, and yet the treatment of giants across this entire ecosystem, not just Barnum, but his competitors and contemporaries across multiple countries, follows a remarkably consistent script. The giants are housed in custom accommodations, their movements are managed, their public appearances are controlled, their origin narratives are curated, often leaning on exotic geography, remote ancestry, or military service that provides a credible prior biography without much archival weight behind it. And the contracts under which they operated were, almost without exception, structured in ways that gave the exhibitor significant control over the subject's physical location. I want to be careful here because I recognize that what I'm describing could simply be the standard practices of a predatory entertainment industry operating on vulnerable individuals during a period of minimal labor protection. That explanation fits. It accounts for the control. It accounts for the curated narratives. It does not require anything more. But it does not fully account for the uniformity. Competing industries operating independently in different countries with different legal traditions and different financial models, all arriving at the same general approach to the same category of person, at the same historical moment, with the same documentary sparseness in the background. That uniformity would have required coordination, and I cannot find the coordination. Which means either the coordination was hidden or it organized itself. And of those two possibilities, the second one disturbs me more, because hidden coordination implies intent, but self-organized uniformity implies something deeper, a shared institutional recognition that certain bodies needed to be managed in a certain way, and that this understanding did not need to be spoken aloud to function. Think about what that would mean. It would mean that the exhibition economy was not simply monetizing unusual individuals. It would mean it was performing a secondary function, one that the participants may not have fully articulated even to themselves, taking bodies that posed a classificatory problem for the official understanding of human history and placing them in a context where they could be seen without being understood, displayed without being situated, observed as anomaly rather than as evidence. The Smithsonian Institution was founded in 1846. In the decades that followed, it became the primary repository for the physical record of American prehistory, including the skeletal remains being excavated from mound sites across the Midwest and South. The mound builder controversy, the academic debate about who built the thousands of earthwork structures found across North America, generated enormous institutional tension throughout the 19th century, and the mound excavations, documented in the annual reports of the Bureau of Ethnology, repeatedly noted the presence of skeletal remains of unusual size. I want to be very precise about this, because the claim gets distorted in both directions. The official record does not, on careful reading, consistently claim giant skeletons, but it also does not consistently dismiss unusual size. There is a category of report, not fabricated, not anonymously sourced, but published in the formal literature of American archaeology in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, in which excavators note skeletal dimensions that exceed the normal range, and in which those notations are then absorbed into the broader academic discussion and gradually cease to be foregrounded, not erased, absorbed. There is a difference, because erasure leaves a gap. Absorption leaves no gap at all. The anomalous data point enters the record and is surrounded by so much interpretive context that it becomes functionally inert. And then I come back to the circus, and I think about what function a living giant serves that a skeletal giant cannot. A skeleton in a crate in a Smithsonian storage room is evidence. A living person on a stage, labelled an attraction, charging admission, signing autographs, that person is entertainment. The question of what category of being they belong to does not arise. It doesn't need to. The frame of the freak show has already answered the question before it can be asked. Here is what I cannot resolve, and I want to be honest about that. I cannot demonstrate that the exhibition of giant individuals in the 19th century was deliberately coordinated to suppress evidence of a prior human population of unusual stature. I do not have that document. I do not believe it exists in any accessible archive, and I am skeptical of claims that it does. What I can demonstrate is something quieter, and in some ways harder to dismiss. The temporal clustering is real. The documentary sparseness of origin records is real. The cross-institutional uniformity of treatment is real. The concurrent development of the Smithsonian and the absorption of anomalous skeletal data into increasingly stable narratives is real. And the function that a living displayed giant serves, rendering a classificatory question into a commercial transaction, is real. Each of these facts has an innocent explanation. I have tried each one. They hold individually. It is only when you lay them side by side and look at the shape they make together that the innocent explanations begin to feel like they are doing too much work. I keep thinking about Anna Swan in that burning museum in 1865, about the derrick they used to lower her from the window, about the crowd that gathered below to watch. Here was a woman whose body could not pass through a standard door, being extracted from a burning building while onlookers paid attention, not because they were frightened for her, but because it was extraordinary. And it occurs to me that the most effective way to ensure that something is never taken seriously as evidence is to make it maximally visible as spectacle. You cannot investigate what you have already laughed at. You cannot question the category of something you have already paid to see. The show must go on, and it did for decades, and then the giants stopped appearing. Not gradually, not through the normal attrition of a fading entertainment trend, but with a completeness by the early 20th century that is itself quietly remarkable. The supply dried up, the lineage ended, and the question of where they had come from and what they had been before the tent and the marquee and the carefully written program notes describing their foreign origins and their gentle dispositions, that question simply ceased to be asked. I am not telling you what I think happened. I am not sure I know. What I am telling you is that I have spent a long time with this question, and the longer I sit with it, the less comfortable I am with the ease with which it disappeared. Because questions that disappear cleanly, without remainder, without a visible mechanism of resolution, those are not questions that were answered. They are questions that were housed somewhere quiet and left alone. And I find myself wondering, not for the first time, what else is being housed in the quiet? What other questions are standing on a stage right now, labelled as something we already understand, while the real question, the one underneath the display, waits patiently for someone to notice the frame? That's the door I keep finding. I haven't opened it yet. I'm not sure I want to.